Welcome. My name's Kevin, and this is the Bible Artist Podcast, and specifically, this is the Bible Verse series. It's a conversation that we're having where we are taking the biblical book, the biblical story of David's time while he was in the wilderness on the run from Saul as the leader of kind of a band of outlaws and people who were down on their luck and various different kind of people that were on the outside of society. So he was this leader of this band of outlaws on the run from Saul, just trying to survive. And so we're using that story and we're creating a hypothetical adaptation of it into a TV series. Just as kind of a creative exercise and also as a way to get deeper into the biblical story and understand it emotionally, imaginatively, thematically, all that kind of thing. I'm here with my friends Victor and Chad, we've been taking a little bit of a break because we had like 4th of July. There were some different things that popped up, and I had an interview with Kirk Waller, Gaius and the Chosen, that was kind of messed up the most recent broadcast that we were going to plan on doing. But yeah, I'm excited to get back into things. I'm a little rusty. Probably we all are, but looking forward to actually like really digging into the story. So we've been doing more like kind of big picture stuff, talking about kind of topical questions. And actually, let me pull those up in just a second. So we'll be moving from kind of the more topical stuff to discussing the actual outline of our season and kind of the actual story and the shape of what is going to be happening in our show. So before we kind of dig into things, Victor, Chad, anything you guys want to share or thoughts on kind of where things have been so far?
So far, I love what we're doing. This is it's been a lot of fun. It's been very fascinating learning about this stuff and just kind of looking at all of these stories, that we think we've seen, but when you're really looking at it, is like, how would you tell this as a story? It's like a whole bunch of details pop up that you just never would have noticed before in really fascinating ways. And that's been one of the most interesting things for me, is just to see all these little nuggets of information that I always just kind of just glossed right over.
Yeah, I'm still like stumped by the Urim and Thummim or discussion thing. And even as I was re-listening to some bits of Samuel just on the way here, and like chapter 28, like I don't even know if we talked about this, but like Saul mentions that, or is this the narrator? Yeah, it's the narrator saying, that Saul, this is chapter 28, Saul, when he inquired of the Lord didn't answer him either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. And it's just like, sorry, we don't have to go into that, but I was just like, do we even talk about the idea that like, anyways, sorry, off track. I'm still puzzled over that. So I guess I'm looking forward to like getting out of some of that and then to just, I guess the story and see where we go from there. Sorry, I lost my head there for a sec.
No. Thanks for bringing that up. So I did actually come across that, like you, kind of after our conversation. Probably should have done a little more research beforehand. But if anyone is wanting to take an even deeper dive into the Urim and Thummim and inquiring of God, I actually did a blog post on my member exclusive blog, my Buy Me a Coffee, where I kind of dig into some other biblical passages related to it. There's actually, like, if you like search for like inquire, like some kind of follow some of the root words and stuff, it is a little illuminating. Like I have a better sense of like that the inquiring, it happens either in like a judicial context or in like a military context, which are actually not that far away from each other. Because if you think of like the judges, they are both like the judicial and like the military leader. Like those things are kind of merged. So like the inquiring of God, it usually happens involving either judicial matters or military, which kind of fits with what we see in Samuel. And then that later passage in Samuel does provide a little bit broader lens of like how God can potentially answer either with
or even
prophets
that by it God can choose not to answer. It's not just like a automatic like I'm going to get an answer. It's like that kind of threw me off because I kind of thought of it as like, oh, when you do it, you get some sort of answer. But the implication seems to be that. Anyways, it kind of reminded me because I've been reading Harry Potter with my kids that like there are certain things in that universe that J.K. Rowling has concocted that like they kind of create holes or like break the. I don't know. There's certain features of the magical world that she's created that like you're like, hey, hold on a second, like why isn't this used more in this these other contexts and certain spells that seem really powerful or potions or like why don't they use that all the time? And so that's kind of what it reminded me of as I'm in Samuel and Harry Potter at the same time. And I kind of look at that as like anyways, just similar and still trying to figure it out, but I'll have to read your post, Kevin. So
so I did bring up a list of questions. I'm not going to read through all of them, but in our previous episodes, we've dug through a lot of big picture topics. We still have to talk about the frame, but I'm actually thinking we could hold off on doing that until we've got a little bit better sense of like the shape of our story, because that might give us hints about like what type of frame we want to do, if we want to do a frame, and like just kind of provide us some meat to work with. So we'll come back to the frame down the road, but we are going to actually dig into potential kind of outlines for our season. I've put together a couple myself, like 2 different versions. These are not like the only options. We can definitely work on them, edit them. People in the comments, please offer us your feedback if you've got ideas for, oh, you should move this thing here, or, oh, make sure to include this event, or I'm not sure if we need that. Anything you want to share, we are welcome to hear that feedback and include you in the conversation. I am checking the comments as things are going. So this is definitely something that we want to involve people in. And if you're watching this later on, you can also comment later, and I will continue to take that feedback into consideration. But here, let's get into our first outline. Hopefully is this going to be kind of hard to see? Let's see. Can you guys, like, are you able to see it good enough yourselves?
I'm gonna have to do this, but
can you zoom into like little pieces of it as needed, or does it let you do that?
Let's see. Sorry guys for figuring this out. That's why.
I can see enough of it.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way to show the mouse pointer, so at least people watching can know what
kind of like follow
what part
along
we're referring to.
Yeah, maybe I'll you know what I'll do is in the show notes I will eventually include a link to our outline, so that people, if you want to go back and kind of look through it with being able to kind of look at it more closely, you'll be able to do that as well. So
I'm like squinting and I'm like reading a part that says Doug and Saul, and I'm like, I don't remember there being a Doug here. It's got to be David, right? Or is it Doeg?
Oh yeah,
Doeg.
No, it could be Doeg. Yeah,
it's Doeg.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Doug though. I think we should.
Should we call him Doug?
That's our frame or whatever. Like everything is gonna be from Doug's perspective.
I think that's how we should pronounce it in the show. Just, hey, Doug.
There we go. Okay. Let me kind of explain a little bit of what we've got here, and then we can actually like talk through some of the substance of it. So just to kind of orient people, up here on the x-axis, these are different episodes in the season, and I'm plotting out like 10 episodes. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of arbitrary, but it feels
Standard.
like a fairly standard like season for shows nowadays. You know, you could give or take a couple episodes, but so 1 through 10 up here. I've got highlighted 1, 5, and 10 because those are kind of some major points. So the start of the show, the midpoint of the show, and then the conclusion of the season. Then here on the y-axis, we've got kind of different characters or different plot lines. So we've got the big picture for kind of David's people. The slave is kind of, I'm just calling him that for now. We may give him a name and think about more kind of details, but would talked about having one of our point of view characters potentially being a former slave who runs away and joins David's band. So wanted to include him on the outline. Abiathar, I'd also suggested it being a character that's worth following, and then just kind of David and his men in general. You know, that might also include like Joab. We may want to like break up some of these into a little bit more detail, but for now, this is what we've got. And then the purple section are people that are involved with Saul's team. I did the big picture for Saul down here just so that I could. It just made it easier. But then, yeah, the servant and Jonathan, because we talked about potentially having Jonathan's servant be a significant character. Doeg and Saul. So Doeg is a kind of Saul's like hatchet man, or maybe like, you know, kind of spying on people, that kind of thing. I put the Hittite here, which will turn out to be Uriah the Hittite. I was thinking that potentially we keep him mostly associated with Saul's men until maybe later in the season, but we may want to move that earlier. That's we won't necessarily get into some stuff like that as much right now, I think, because that's like kind of a more flexible thing. Once we have like a sense of like the kind of the biblical events in the season, then we can kind of fill in some of the character stories that are more flexible because we're making them up. And then way at the bottom, we've got the Philistines. I didn't do a lot of detail there because they're more kind of like occasional villains. I don't think that they'll actually be like a recurring character within the story. They'll more just be kind of a force that's out there.
Yeah, Saul's going to be the main antagonist, I'm guessing.
Yes.
For our first season. So.
Yeah. But you know, he may not be necessarily like the point of view character. Like we may get Saul through the eyes of the servant or through the eyes of Doeg or Uriah the Hittite. Yeah. So then we got the y-axis, and then we see how that character like plays into the different episodes, kind of the different story. So these different bubbles represent kind of story events, events from scripture, and how they'll kind of fit into the different episodes and the different characters that might be involved with them, stuff like that. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions before we keep going with that, or?
This just like this is something from from preaching class, and it was this idea of a sermon being like it should have unity, order, and progress, and for some reason that's stuck in my brain. And so this like makes me think that like you need to have that going in two different directions here. Like this is new to me, and it's gives me a lot of respect for what people do. You know, assuming this is kind of how people who create shows, like the kind of things they have to think through. They think along. You need to have unity, order, and progress with each of the rows and columns here, I suppose, right? And that's a big challenge.
Yeah, kind of like playing Sudoku.
Yeah, and I feel like that'll be a lot of what we're talking about here is like how do we give our season a sense of like progress, give it a sense of unity, like what are the the moments that we want to emphasize, and by emphasize, like where you put the different events in the story kind of shifts what the emphasis of the season is, or like kind of how you give a sense of progress to the season.
Mhm.
So so I guess I can kind of walk through my kind of initial stab at the story, and then you guys can give thoughts. So first episode would focus a lot on the city of Nob, which is a city of the Israelite priests. So we would have David and his men as they are kind of fleeing from Saul. They stop at the city of Nob. David, that's when he asks for Goliath's sword. He gets bread from the high priest. He inquires from God. So we'd actually probably not see that event through David's perspective, but I was thinking we would see it through Abiathar's perspective. He's not the high priest; he's the son of the high priest. So he might be like maybe questioning like whether his dad, like what's David doing here? Like we could kind of have some drama going on there, and then eventually, so that would probably be in like the front half of the episode, and then the back half of the episode would be Doeg and Saul. So Doeg is there. He sees David getting help from the priests earlier in the episode, and then Saul would show up in the later half of the episode and end up slaughtering all the priests, and then the Abiathar would go off fleeing. Would also have introduced some of the other characters. So if we have the slave character, would introduce him. He would kind of flee from slavery in that initial episode. And then I was also thinking that with Uriah, he could kind of refuse to participate in the slaughter of the priests, and that could kind of be a inciting incident for him if he starts off as like a soldier with Saul's army. Then he like sees this atrocity, and that kind of turns him off of Saul, and then he's like kind of questioning, but we would kind of have him going back and forth questioning whether he wants to stick with Saul, and kind of gradually getting pulled into the orbit of David's men as the season goes along. Anyway, episode 2 would kind of introduce the outlaws themselves. So like the probably the slave running away and Abiathar running away, they would meet kind of towards the end of episode 1, and maybe then like maybe at the very end of episode 1 encounter David and his men, but we'd actually get like a real intro to what the outlaws were like in episode 2. I was also thinking, so Samuel mentions how David he takes his father and his mother and brings them to the king of Moab to protect them from Saul. So you could just have that like be like a normal event, but I was thinking like to make it like a little more dramatic, like you could have it be kind of a rescue mission potentially, where David is like Saul is like already got David's father and mother, and David has to like save them. But we'll get into more details as things go along. But regardless, some sort of storyline involving kind of David trying to get his father and mother out, while kind of the slave is getting to know the outlaws. And yeah, there would probably want to introduce the servant involved in that story. And then 3 and 4 would have the Samuel mentions David actually makes 2 trips to join the Philistines, and the first one doesn't go well. So we might kind of like open with that, but really the bulk of 3 and 4 would be events involving the city of Keilah, which comes under attack from the Philistines. So 3 would probably be kind of focused on David making the decision to go help Keilah, and then 4 would involve once they've already helped Keilah fight off the Philistines, then David has to make the decision to flee Keilah because they're going to betray him to Saul. The people there have decided to hand him over, and would get Saul making plans to trap David involved with that story. And then midpoint of the season, I was thinking we would do the David in the cave catches Saul going poop and has Saul at his mercy. And after that event, we're told that kind of Saul leaves, and there's a period where David has a little bit more peace, like Saul's not kind of constantly hounding him. And so that would potentially mark like a major transition in the season where David has kind of an opportunity to not be constantly fleeing from Saul, but to start like building up his own power. So that gets into this big picture. Like the first few episodes would kind of be like action packed, as like David is kind of constantly fending off problems from Saul and his men. And Saul is kind of constantly chasing David. And then after episode 5, David is able to kind of focus on like building up his own power. So we'd get into like him trying to marry wide, the stuff with Nabal and Abigail, and potentially his other wife. Would get some stuff with our point of view characters probably involved with that. And then I was thinking, in the meantime, like why is Saul not like going back to attack David? Well, maybe he has some stuff with the Philistines. Maybe there's like some, maybe like Saul is kind of trying to fight the Philistines and kind of regain his honor by doing that. And we could have kind of Jonathan and Doeg. So Doeg's the bad guy, and then Jonathan is Saul's son, who's David's friend. They could kind of be competing for Saul's heart. Like Jonathan is trying to push Saul towards like, either reconciling with David or at least just kind of letting him be, whereas Doeg is like kind of fueling his anxiety and his suspicions. And there could be kind of some back and forth throughout that period. But then Doeg eventually kind of somehow tips Saul back towards wanting to attack David. And we could have like, there's a story of Jonathan going into the wilderness to warn David, and they swear oaths. So he could kind of, that could be tied to like him finding out that that Saul has finally like turned wanting to attack David again. And then there's another kind of Saul goes to pursue David's story. And once again, kind of David has Saul at his mercy, but lets him go. And that immediately after that story, we're told that David flees to Gath. So I was thinking that because he's, we have it kind of, we give that story a sense of like, he's realized like, I was trying to build power. I thought maybe we could both kind of live and let live, but it seems like, he's, his promise to leave me alone is not going to hold. Like he's, as long as I'm anywhere kind of within his grasp, he's going to keep on trying to get me. And so I better go flee to the Philistines, because that's the only place that I can kind of find safety during this period. And that would kind of be the climactic decision of episode 10. Okay. I said a lot there. Yeah. Do you guys want to ask any questions or offer feedback? Or
Go ahead, Chad.
I just wondered why you went with the starting and then like the rationale for the starting and ending point. I've always kind of gravitated a little like to the chapter before. Obviously, there's not a right or wrong here, but I'm curious what your rationale is for starting and ending where you did, as far as the source material. Yeah.
So I like the destruction of Nob as kind of like I like kind of a big flashy intro event that really establishes Saul as like a really bad guy, and like really launches the priest storyline into play. So you were thinking more starting back, like
I don't know.
Back when like David initially flees, and
I kind of like it. In fact, it could even be like a pre like credits or whatever kind of like scene. Starting on a dramatic note of, I picture, I don't know if it actually is at night or if I just imagine it that way. But yeah, where David is like this, it's where David and Jonathan, right? Like, where Jonathan warns David and there's the whole shooting of the arrows kind of scene, right? And you know this from other conversations that I also like it for just having that little, like I don't know if it's a servant or a young lad being kind of a character there. But even apart from that it's like this emotional kind of scene where it kind of feels like the sending off of David onto this journey. Does he go into the wilderness basically after that, or just away from? It feels. How would you describe it? It's some sort of parting.
Yeah. No. As you're saying that, like, you're right. I think that would be a good moment, especially. I didn't focus a ton on the servant, but that would be like an important moment for his character.
The only issue about starting off with that is that we have no connection to either character at this point. And that's a pretty powerful moment that I would want to know that both of the characters and care about their friendship, to know that this parting is going to be as impactful as it is.
I think I also, I didn't put this in the outline, but I had also considered potentially jumping back in episode 2 and doing that scene with the servant, like from the servant's perspective. So I should, like, if we are going to do that, I should like put that in the outline. But I do like that moment. Is that the same? No, that's the scene with the ephod getting covered by the goat hair or whatever is a earlier escape, right? That's like the scene where David keeps like firing the arrows. Yeah, I definitely think we could potentially either like you said, like as like an intro to episode 1, or a flashback, or like kind of an intro to episode 2 that kind of is a little asynchronous. I think we could potentially include that scene. One
thing also that I think is going to affect a lot of things is, like, is David going to be a point of view character, or like we talked about, potentially having him just be, the figure that's kind of, that they circle around, but we're following his band of men, and they just we're never actually like inside David's mind. We're not experiencing it through him. We're just seeing the reactions and the effects that it has on our main characters. That's one way. I mean, if we're going to do that, then I think that maybe slightly affects how we would go into the first episode or 2.
Yeah, I'm still having that as my default, that David is not our point of view. So I've got David and his men on here more as like a placeholder for kind of where the band is going. But I'm not imagining David being like our point of view. So we would mostly see events. We would see like that event through the eyes of the servant primarily, I think, as opposed to like through the eyes of David.
Right.
Yeah. But
are there certain scenes where that's going to be, what scenes are going to be the most challenging for having a non like David point of view character? Like, are there certain scenes where you're like, yeah, David's, it's just David and Saul or something? Like, are there scenes like that that you foresee as being difficult to do, or are there like kind of creative ways around that?
So like David and Saul in the cave, David's like, he goes alone to cut off the corner of the robe. I mean, when I say David isn't our point of view, that doesn't mean he can't ever be the point of view for an episode. It just means like he's not kind of the through line for or like his point of view is not the through line for the season. It doesn't mean like we couldn't have certain scenes or certain episodes where we get into his head a little bit more. Yeah.
That's kind of how The Chosen does it. I mean, we're technically with all of the apostles. Jesus is there the whole time, and we sometimes spend time with him, but we're never truly in his brain like we are with some of the apostles.
Yeah, but we do get some more like Jesus-centered episodes, like the season 3, episode 3, where he goes back to Nazareth, and we're mostly following him for that episode. But that's kind of like the deviation from the norm, as and not like kind of the typical thing. Yeah. I guess circling back, Chad, to your initial question, as far as the ending point, I thought that the decision to flee to Gath kind of was like a pretty significant like shift of like location, shift of mindset, that it kind of deserved like to work as like an endpoint for one season and like the beginning of a new season, which because like those two times feel like pretty distinct. I mean, if we were doing like a 20 like potentially you could do a show and that's like the midpoint of the show, but I think if we want to keep the seasons like relatively short, then I think
and this feels kind of cliffhangery a little bit too, like what's going to happen now. That changes everything. That's different.
Yeah. And it also potentially, I haven't given this a whole lot of thought, but you could potentially even have with the Philistines a little bit of progress. You're talking about you want to have like a sense of progress where there's a bit of a story there as far as like initially David is unsuccessful in trying to flee to the Philistines, and then by the end things have changed for him that forced him to go back, but potentially have things changed for the Philistines. So maybe like Saul's efforts to fight the Philistines actually have some initial success, and so they're like looking for David as a potential ally to help them out. So we have one of the things that I suppose we're wanting to do is have a sense of change from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. Go for it, Jen.
Yeah, I'm curious how do you see like a kind of theological, like again, the thing that I'm more familiar with is like preparing sermons, and so it's like you can take a text of any length and there might be a lot of points you could make, but you choose like a big idea, right? In fact, we'll go with that. Is there with this chunk with this particular chunk beginning and end, like starting in 21 through the beginning of 27, like do you see season 1 as making like having a big idea in a theological kind of sense? Like is that what say you?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair point. So I will say I am of the opinion that David's decision to flee to the Philistines and to Gath, I think we want to make it understandable and very sympathetic, but at the same time not entirely like we want there to be a sense that it's maybe not the best thing, because that's the biblical narrator in Samuel doesn't come right out and say like this was a bad decision for David to do for things like that, but there are kind of hints I feel like in the text in as far as like how things play out, that the decision to flee and like try to find safety among the Philistines was questionable for David. And so I feel like it's actually almost like a negative arc for him, by the end of the season. Like he is early on, I feel like he's actually in a better place. Like he's trusting God and just kind of living by faith that, God's going to protect him. And God does protect, God shows his willingness to protect David by, this significant moment with Saul in the cave where God just like let Saul walk into David's hands. And I think David actually is at his kind of high point when he lets Saul go and gives his speech. But then I feel like there's kind of a, this season where he's kind of like building power and marrying wives and things like that. Externally, it looks like he's kind of rising, like he's, developing power and potentially like kind of setting himself up so that, if Saul dies, he'll be in a better place to claim the kingship. But then like he still spares Saul when Saul comes, but instead of like just kind of continuing to live by faith, he feels like the need to go to like the big powerful player nearby and like seek shelter with them, the powerful pagans nearby, as opposed to kind of just continuing to trust God.
Well, that seems like that's the whole theme, is trusting God, especially David early on is doing that and Saul is not. That's why they're they're in conflict with each other. And, you kind of see them, go off in different directions, but then, even David has a little bit of bumps along the way. If you want to play it that way, where he's not trusting God as much, that's like all of these questionable decisions potentially that he's making can be framed that way. But I think just trusting God, that would be the theme I would think we're trying to say.
Yeah,
is that,
I think so.
It may not always look like what you think it's going to look like. I'm sure everybody that was with David is like, how did you not kill Saul? You had him right there. Nobody there except David would be the one thinking that was the right thing to do by letting him go. And I think trusting God where no one else would have made that decision.
I think that's I wanted to capture this and I didn't get it into the illustration, but I think externally it looks like all the action like is up here and then things are kind of like easier for David here. But I think in reality, or like in spiritually, David is in a much better place right here when he's trusting God. But here he's getting like, we would probably be showing his men kind of pressuring him more, coming out of what they saw happen in the cave. Like they could actually be pretty frustrated and disappointed with what they saw in the cave situation, or at least some of them could be. And that's what, like, as kind of a concession to them, he's marrying the wives and trying to do all this stuff to show them like that he can build power. And that's actually him, like kind of, like you said, kind of having blips of lack of like trust or lack of faith. And then he does the sparing Saul thing again, but he knows like, oh, his men are really going to be angry, after that. And we could kind of build up some drama as far as like where his men are at and his expectation of how they'll react. And so maybe the decision to flee Gath may also be kind of like him conceding to his men who want to kind of trust in strength instead of trusting in faith. That was kind of one of the tensions that we discussed in earlier episode. Yeah.
This is just like I don't know what kind of question this is, but like if we're thinking about focusing on characters that aren't David, like is the idea that like you can take what would really be like maybe an internal struggle within David, and you like externalize it by having like characters kind of debating it and talking it out. Like, is that
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the values of that approach. And one of the things that, like, TV does certain things, TV and like literature do different kinds of things. So TV tends to work better if you externalize like internal conflicts and have them represented by like different groups of people that you can see visually. You can do a lot through visual depiction in terms of like embodying ideas and things like that. Whereas like a novel, you can like really dig into the thoughts that are going on inside a person's heart and like the back and forth that they're feeling. And that those kinds of things are actually often difficult to convey in a really effective way on the screen. So yeah, I think that would be kind of one of the things that would be after. So I definitely, this doesn't come out here on the outline, but I would want to expand more kind of our sense of the David's men and have like kind of a antagonist within that group that is kind of pushing him more towards the.
Yeah, I mean, especially for them, they'd be like, the minute David wins, we're all going to be living like kings. That's the whole point for a lot of these people, is that they're following him because he's one heartbeat away from being the king of Israel. And then the rest of them will all be, so I mean, that I can see every decision he makes that doesn't get them closer to that. Only, especially if we have one character that's like the main, what are we doing here character. He could be getting more frustrated as it doesn't follow his plan for what he thinks should be doing, which would be killing Saul and then moving into Israel.
Yeah, Chad.
Yeah. Thinking of some of these characters, like I think like the slave and the servant and the Hittite, like have you figured out which value you feel like each of them kind of embodies and like that fuels their point of view when they interact with other characters?
Yeah, so not exactly. I feel like they are. So I'm thinking of them more like as the point of view character. They are kind of probably seeing kind of the different factions, and they are pulled back and forth between them. I mean, the servant probably more like on kind of the faith and trust side, because he's with Jonathan, and he's like kind of observing kind of the opposite in Saul and Doeg. I think the Hittite, you might have kind of a bit of a conversion story where maybe he starts off being like a very much a soldier who has some honor, but is mostly just trusts in his arms and stuff like that. But then maybe is kind of impressed by David over time by what he sees, and then kind of like eventually defects because of that. The slave, I think he would. So joining kind of early on in the Outlaws, he would like kind of start off being an outsider, and so he would probably kind of be seeing the different tensions within the group. So yeah, actually, I think a lot of the characters on here, like our point of view characters, they aren't as much representing the perspectives. They are the ones that are kind of are getting pulled in between them, and like the protagonist or the antagonists, like Saul and Doeg, or within David's mighty men like Joab and Abishai, or we might even have like an additional someone who's like even further down the side of like trusting in strength. They are kind of representing the different poles. Maybe Abiathar, he might more kind of represent the trust side, or like the if there's like a prophet, like the Gad, I think they might also kind of represent that. But does that answer your question, Chad? Or
I think like whenever you do something like this, like what does each character want? What's their goal
yeah,
in the world of the show? And then how do we line that up with one of our themes for it?
so actually, also now that I'm thinking about it, I think forgiveness would also probably be an important thing here, or like or at least like non-retribution, because we've got kind of the beginning of the season, which is this like really dark act of violence, and then a couple of like the major moments in the season are David sparing Saul. So I think that that's got to be like the decision to spare Saul. It's an act of trust, because David is also like, if he killed Saul, then he would be kind of securing himself. But it's also like an act of, if not like total forgiveness, at least it's like an act of like non-retribution, not taking matters into, into his own hands, to deal out like death and judgment. So that would probably be important for Abiathar as a character, since all of his people get killed in episode 1. And then also potentially for the slave, like if we have kind of a backstory for him where he loses a lot early on, that could kind of come back somehow later in his story. Like maybe he has a chance to get retribution, like maybe his master is one of Saul's men, and he could potentially have an option to take vengeance there. So yeah, that might be like another important theme within the season. Should we take a quick look at the kind of other outline that I put together? It's not too different, but yeah, a little bit different shape. Some things kind of shifted around. So yeah, the first episode is pretty much the same, I think. And the last episode, I think, is pretty much the same. And again, what we can kind of revisit whether we want to go back a little bit further with the intro with David and his time with Jonathan. And episode 2, still thinking like kind of the slave and Abiathar joining the Outlaws would be important. But where kind of the shapes are more significantly different is where the kind of a lot of the fleeing from Saul happens. So in the first outline, after episode 1, there's kind of like a constant stream of like Saul chasing David, or the Philistines. It's pretty action packed for like the first half of the season, and then things slow down a little bit for the next few episodes, and then they pick up towards the end. With this outline, that's kind of flipped. So the first few episodes, when the slave joins, David is fairly at peace. So Saul's not pursuing him yet. So we move like, David kind of getting wives and the stuff with Abigail up front. We could have Saul kind of fighting the Philistines during that time as well. We could potentially move Jonathan warning David earlier, and some stuff like that. And then within kind of the scope of this shape, the midpoint, kind of the big shift in the season, instead of it being the David like forgiving Saul, we could potentially have it be the decision to go help the city of Keilah, because David has kind of been fairly at peace, and so that decision to go help the city kind of puts him back on a collision course with Saul, and launches kind of back into some more kind of action-packed episodes, and then maybe you have like a brief respite in episode 9, and then kind of the conclusion in episode 10. So yeah, any questions or thoughts from you guys?
I kind of like version A better. I like starting off with more action. I think that's kind of the way to go. How I feel is just hit it in, like it. Let's see all these characters, in a very intense situation, because their whole situation is going to be intense for the most part. So I think we start off, we see the dynamics at play, we see kind of what's at stake for all these people right off the top.
Yeah, I don't have thoughts. I'd have to like see them more side by side. What would you say is like the key difference, I guess, Kevin, if you boil it down?
Yeah, so I would say it's kind of what you emphasize when. So this one, I'd say it emphasizes less the event of David sparing Saul in the cave, because that event doesn't lead to a really like lasting period of like peace for David and his men, and instead it emphasizes that decision of David and his men to go help the city of Keilah, like to kind of put themselves in harm's way and kind of expose themselves after kind of having a period of relative safety, which like, yeah, I think there are both kind of fit in with the theme of trusting God. There's like a trust of God that's required by both. I think I am with Victor in slightly preferring the A outline. That's the one I did first. I kind of did the B one in part just to have like another option, and I do think there are like some advantages to like being able to kind of like have like a more action kind of building up as the season progresses. But like I said, like I think actually in terms of like the important like arc of the character, David is maybe actually under more pressure in the A outline, because he's not under pressure from Saul, but he's under more pressure from his men potentially when they're at peace. Chad.
Yeah, if I can read these numbers right, in the B version, you I guess I don't know if you mess with the chronology or just like how the stories or the order they're presented in. And I was just tell me about kind of that decision. I see chapter 26 kind of inserted, taken and just placed earlier. And like take like The Chosen, where it's like in the Gospels you're dealing with like 4 different accounts where events can fall in different places, and so that that we kind of get that, like, they have to kind of patch things together and have to make choices. But yeah, tell me about like, and I don't think it's a bad choice here. I'm just wondering if you can explain like why you felt like you could reasonably take something later in the story. Like, is it, and I actually don't know enough. I know not everything is always presented chronologically, but just tell us about just that idea there.
Yeah, so it's definitely a change, and it would be playing more like I think that Samuel generally is more chronological, especially during the period that we're covering. So yeah, it would be like making a change. There are some changes. I can go back to A and point to a couple of more minor changes that I made. the reason that I did that one is because basically in order to kind of keep like a sense of this, it goes to the progression idea. So like if you want to, it depends on like what type of progress you're wanting to do. So this one, the progress is towards like kind of more intensity in terms of the pursuit of Saul. And so like if we had that story with David and Nabal, it could potentially go here in like episode 9, but it would just kind of feel like a little bit of a distraction or like a blip, because I in this outline I'm not emphasizing as much that period of time after the he spares Saul in the cave. But I still wanted to have the actual events, and so I moved it back here to where there was like a little bit more space in the timeline of the season, wanting to kind of keep a lot of it has to do with like where I'm wanting to kind of place emphasis, because like kind of the midpoint of the season is like a point of emphasis. So I wanted to have this event in episode 5, and so that partially dictates like, okay, if I want to do that, then and I want to fit this storyline in, and it can't fit here towards the end, then I'll have to like move it back towards the beginning. So yeah, this one is that's probably a more significant shift. I don't think it's like too distracting probably for most people. Yeah, I don't think it's really disruptive to the events of the show. We've got a listener. Joshua says, haven't been here in a while, but have been keeping up. Super cool. Oh, he finished season 1 of his story. Cool. Well, thanks, Joshua, for being here. Appreciate you. Oh, and Joseph, thanks for smile. Jesus loves us. Anyway, yeah. So that's the main motivation there for why I moved that event.
Can you go back to version A real quick then?
Yeah.
So where?
So
okay. So you spread that out like in a few episodes here.
So because the midpoint is the sparing Saul in the cave, and like we've got more of the action stuff here up front. There's time in the back half of the season, and like thematically, as far as like what we're doing there, we're showing kind of David getting pushed more and more by his men to kind of try to build up earthly power, so that story also kind of fits with kind of with what's going on there. Yeah.
So I hope you don't feel like you're being grilled. It's like
No.
I'm asking. Okay, good, because this makes sense to me. It's like you prepared like this, and it's like more thoughtful than anything I have. So the best thing I could do is just like ask, I think, thoughtful questions. So what would be the development between either with the characters or thematically between that hinge point at episode 5 and then at the end with episode 10? Because they both, it's a nice pairing of David sparing Saul both times. Like what do you see as like the development or the difference between those two episodes? Like what's
so as far, a lot of it has to do with what comes after. So this time David spares Saul and he sticks around, and he does start like making mistakes as far as like trying to kind of build up his own power, but he stays like around, like he stays in the land of Israel, and in that sense is still kind of trusting God to protect him from Saul. Whereas after episode 10, he spares Saul, like he has kind of mercy there, but he isn't totally trusting God to continue to protect him from Saul, and so he decides to flee to Gath, where he can get protection from Philistines.
Okay, so remind me your friend's name again, who joined us on an earlier episode.
Kyle.
Oh, yeah, Kyle.
Yeah,
Oh,
Kyle.
sorry, I thought I was thinking of someone else. Yeah.
Oh,
Kyle.
okay, yeah. So not just to appease Kyle, but he was very insistent that David and Goliath, like, that's what people are paying them, money for the tickets for. Is like they want to see that. Now, do you feel like that actually fits in really well as a flashback somehow at the very end? Because, like, if David is fleeing to Gath because he does not trust God, like, it makes me think of that time where he was, fighting the champion of Gath, where he did trust God. And so what do you think? Like, maybe there's another point where that makes sense, or maybe you feel like you really don't need to include that episode, but like, what do you think of that idea, I guess?
Yeah,
Well, if I can add there, I think if you go with even more flashbacks, if you want to show David's relationship with Saul before everything went bad, you could kind of do a whole bunch of those little flashbacks to really show why David's making this compassionate sort of, type of thing. Like, and David and Goliath and all these other things all kind of tie into that. It's like, why is he making this decision of this person that's trying to kill him?
I didn't necessarily plot in or like punch in like flashbacks, but I do like that idea of including some flashbacks with David and Saul's relationship, potentially doing the David and Goliath story. I could potentially see that, like you said, in like episode 10. I could even see it in like episode 1 of season 2 as like you like open with that, and then you cut to like now David is like working with the Philistines to like really like sharp, like bring a sharp contrast to like where David was and where he is right now. So I'm open to where we could potentially place that that like flashback to maximum effect, but I could see it working well in episode 10 to draw some sort of contrast. And I know we discussed with episode 5 as a like a bottle episode, or like I think one concept that we had was like having it start out with like some of the men reflecting on events from David's life or something like that. So that could also be a good place to include stuff.
One thing too, the reason why it'd be good to have the two different similar events is that we'll be seeing a lot of this stuff through the eyes of his men, to where they may okay, I can go with you the first time you let him go, but then the pressure for the second time to do that, it's going to be even more disruptive for his whole group of people. Like they're really not going to understand. Again, what's the deal?
Yeah, and with the second time, I feel like if I'm remembering that kind of little narrative well, I think there's a little bit more. David has a little bit more time to kind of like gather himself there. So I could even see there being like a near rebellion among the men when they like, or like a really real big push for him to like do what you better do it this time. And then when he comes back and he doesn't do it, he has to like give them something basically. And so the Philistine decision kind of flows right out of that. Chad, you've been trying to jump in.
No, I have like lots of thoughts. One of the things that's jumped out, we might have discussed this before, forgive me, but one of the things that keeps jumping out at me is like David's reverence for the Lord's anointed. And even when he's like, there's all these deals with, him marrying one of Saul's daughters. It's like, David doesn't ever say like, oh, like, I'm really excited to marry this woman. Like, he's like, oh, I get to be the king's son. Like, what an honor. And there's just this reverence for the king. And that's, seems to fuel his decision not to exact, I guess, retribution on him, precisely because he's the Lord's anointed.
Yes.
And so, like, how do you see that kind of fitting in? Because that seems like if you're ending, like, you have these two stories where it's like on the basis of the fact that, like, Saul is the Lord's anointed, like, that's enough reason for him to make that decision. Whereas other people, you could imagine something along the lines of people are attracted to David, at this point, because, like, this is the guy who defeated, the champion of Gath.
Yeah.
And, like, and here he's not willing to defeat his enemy in Saul in the same way. I can't remember where my question is in there, but it's like there's that theme, or just that emphasis on the Lord's anointed as something that David, it's a conviction that he has. It's guiding his decisions, I guess, that, like, other people may not see it the same way.
So this is another, like, big argument for having the attack on Nob in episode 1, because God has 2 anointeds, right? Well, maybe 3, but the priests are also, like, the anointed. So we have kind of a contrast of, like, Saul, like, slaughtering the Lord's anointed for no good reason at all, versus, like, David sparing the Lord's anointed when he has, like, every reason at this point. Especially, after having already done it once, doing it again. So yeah, I definitely feel like there's something there that you'd really want to draw attention to, kind of the bookends of the season. Yeah, I don't know. Is that helpful, or?
Well, it's like they're both chosen ones, and
Yes.
Saul is almost like, this is what happens when you turn to the dark side. I mean, there's 2 paths. Saul could have had all the same, glory that David had, and be the hero that we talked about, but he didn't choose that path. It's and especially if we start off with him slaughtering everybody, that's almost like Order 66 right there.
Yeah.
At the beginning. I mean, he starts off as and especially if you're not really familiar with, Bible history, you won't know necessarily until we tell you in the show that, oh, this guy was, like, anointed earlier on.
Yep.
He was the David, a while back. But if we start off where he's just the villain, that I think it's a more interesting turn when we find out that he was this anointed one, just like David was. And that'll be more poignant for, I mean, the people that know the story won't be as surprised, but I think for regular people watching it, I think they would think that was a pretty interesting turn.
I just thought of something as you were saying that, like, with what I was saying of me, like, thinking that David's decision to flee to the Philistines is a bad one. There could almost be, like, this anxiety that David, even though he spared Saul, like, by deciding to join the Philistines, later on in that story, like, the expectation from the Philistines is, like, you're going to go march out with us into battle. Eventually, David kind of avoids that because the other Philistine leaders don't want him there. But David at least says that he's going to. Now, we don't know, like, the assumption maybe is that, maybe David's going to turn traitor on the Philistines and attack them from behind or whatever. But we don't know for sure. Like, and so there could be this sense that even though David has spared Saul at the end, by joining up with the Philistines, he is potentially, like, aligning himself against the Lord's anointed there, and, like, kind of putting himself on the course to actually be fighting Saul. So that's
You
just
could frame that as in him, acquiescing to the demands of his people. That could just be one of these things where I'm like, I got to give him something.
Yeah.
Where he makes some bad decisions, and it's kind of like just how the whole reason why Saul was made king is because the people wanted a king, even though God said, "I don't think you want a king, but okay, I'll give it to you." This could kind of be him. It's like, I don't think this is what the right thing, but I'm going to give you what you guys want, which is, something that looks like progress.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing I like about this outline versus the other one is that I like the idea of Saul kind of having fighting with the Philistines, and that can potentially provide motivation on their end for why earlier in the story when David flees to Gath, they reject him and he has to pretend like he's gone crazy. But then like later on, they receive him. So potentially like Saul may actually be kind of on the upswing in fighting against the Philistines. And so they have this sense of like, we need to recruit someone. So they may actually like be kind of seeking after David in episode 10. Gotcha.
New question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Based on what you've laid out here, Kevin, which episode, vertical, and plot line, horizontal, do you feel most strongly about as you've kind of conceived it so far? And then what are the weakest? Yeah, episode. Like, what's the weakest kind of episode you feel like, and then the plot line that you're most unsure of?
So I think that the episodes like 6 to 9, you kind of see like a lot of like, empty sets there, just because I'm trusting that we would kind of be able to sketch out a little bit more detail there. Like I have this general sense of like, this is kind of the direction we want to go. And we've got like the Abigail Nabal story, like that'll fill up some space there. But there's a little bit more like wiggle room there. I mean, we may have to kind of figure out the kind of where we place the story with like Jonathan and David and the servant, whether that's in episode 1 or episode 2. But generally, like I like kind of the knob event in episode 1. I feel like that there's a lot there to work with. I think episode 5, like I just think that story is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. I feel like the Keila stuff will actually be pretty interesting too. As far as like storylines, I mean, I don't have like a whole lot of definition for some of the characters at this point. I'm more trying to peg like the biblical events, so that's why we get a lot less detail with them. But yeah, like that may actually be kind of a second stage to outlining, is like starting to get more of a sense of like where some of these characters, how they would kind of be developing in time. But I've got kind of a more general sense of like the events, which tend to focus more on kind of like David and his men, and then Saul and his men. Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, I can kind of see the percentages of where we go with stuff, kind of like almost like The Chosen does, about 75-80% with the apostles and like 25% with Gaius and some of the antagonistic side of the stuff to kind of keep the flow going.
Is there like any sort of conventional wisdom for like like tone as you progress through a season? Like I guess putting it this way, yeah, I suppose there is. Usually we expect the end of a season, and a hinge point in the season to be more dramatic kind of moments or episodes. And I don't know, like, do you kind of see the beginning, middle, and end episodes 1, 5, and 10 as like kind of being more heavy and being able to sprinkle in some of the lighter, maybe more comedic elements. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that some of the lighter stuff could potentially be, kind of in these in between parts. Kind of the first half of the season, I feel like will be potentially fairly action packed, but also you could have like some with action, like comedy can come in there a lot too. Like action and comedy don't necessarily cancel each other out as much as like the drama.
I mean, we're gonna have poop, so
yeah, that's true.
That's true.
That is in episode 5. But yeah, I would definitely say episode 1 and episode 10 are probably going to be on like the heavier end of the season.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to just depend on what the character arcs are going to do. Where do they need to be, and then shifting these events or where we put these events in what episode is probably going to be dependent on that.
Yep.
But I like the shape of this. I mean, this is again, I would watch this show in a heartbeat.
Piggy Bank Comics, thanks for reaching out. So this is a theoretical adaptation. So right now we don't have like funds to actually produce the show, but we're doing this as kind of a creative and like a spiritual exercise. And so by engaging with the biblical story in this way, it's helping us both like as storytellers, but also it's helping us kind of get into the biblical story and learn about it. So we've been kind of like digging deeper into some topics in the story. And now we're trying to put together an outline. We probably won't be like doing like full scripts for all the episodes or anything, but we would at least like to kind of have like a fuller, more fleshed out outline for the season. And we may do some stuff like fantasy casting, some concept art, stuff like that. So thanks for reaching out.
And having said that, we're not opposed to, if any producers want to fund this show, we'd be more than willing to work with you.
Yeah, definitely. There's no reason that this couldn't be, a show. The rights are public domain. So, but any other questions you guys feel like at this point, or?
Nope. It's good. It's again, I think I told you this, Kevin, that like I hadn't quite seen a kind of chart like this, and it's really it's helpful, and it gives me some more. Not that I didn't respect what do you call it, a showrunner or like show? I don't know what you call them. The mad geniuses behind good TV shows where they are. Multiple characters and plot lines, and I guess any good novelist does, that too. But, for TV, it's, it's episodic, and like each episode we do expect that like there's, it has its own kind of story or contribution, and, to a larger whole that has a satisfying kind of ending. And in a number of different respects, I don't know. So, Kevin, thanks for putting this together. I'll let you know if I have more questions, but I think I've asked the main ones that I thought of. So
this is like a starting point conversation. So kind of moving from here, we'll probably it might be good to have some conversations about some of these characters and maybe some others, and try to fill in some of these spaces. Can put some thought into some of the questions that have been raised. Do you guys have any other thoughts on as far as where we go from here, what you would
once we start putting the characters in, I mean, that's going to really affect everything else, because you have to start making compromises for what happens to make it look like a TV show looks. You can't just put all your cool stuff in one episode and nothing. You have to like spread stuff out, and it's a big challenge. It's really challenging to fit all this stuff in here. and that's what's making this fun.
Yeah, is there Kevin, is there a, this might be biting off more than we can chew, but like, are you will we go into each episode a little more in depth? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I would like to. We may not do like full outlines for each episode, but maybe like a shortened outline, kind of some of the key events, or like the kind of the general like progression of
like an index card sort of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think especially examining the first or 1, 5, and 10, like, would be really interesting to like, think about more in depth. And
that's true. Yeah, we, even if we don't have time to get to all the episodes,
and maybe just some scenes too that would be cool to see fleshed out.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
Write some stuff out.
Yeah, I may, as like a exercise, just want to write a couple of scenes or something, or maybe at some point I'll write like an episode just to like as a exercise.
We can do like a, what do they call it, a script reading? What do you call it?
Yeah, that would be cool.
Like a table read. Get a
table read.
Bunch
That's
of
what
actors.
it's called. Yeah, that tells you what I know. Yeah, table read. Also, like, I'm not going to spoil it now, but whenever you mention fantasy casting, I want to know what like the default person or actor you have like in your head for David and some of these other characters, I suppose.
I haven't really thought about it too much. My wife is like, she's much better with like actors and actresses, like being able to be like know who they are. So I've told her like, yeah, if you want to like jump on for whenever we do the fantasy casting episode, or like, I don't know if you guys know people who are like knowledgeable of actors, or maybe you guys are. I feel like that will not be like I'll have like thoughts and feedback, but I feel like I probably won't be as useful when we come to that stage. But I'm interested in it. Like I think
that would be fun to get a lot of anyone watching involved.
Yeah.
Send in those ideas and we can kind of
judge,
or
potentially even do like a poll or something. Yeah.
I think it'd be challenging though, because like I mean, we'd be picturing Middle Eastern characters, right? And just from my background, just speaking for myself, it's like I guess to my shame, like I can't name that many. Like most of the actors that I know of are American.
I almost think we'd have to go off that, just kind of more generic, old school. Like if it was 1950, who would we be? Charlton Heston and Marlon Brando and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like I don't know, like I feel like so the Philistines, like they're Greeks, and yeah, I don't know. We can, I'm sure they're we could draw on like Chosen and like I don't know. There are actors out there, but yeah, we may want to be like a little flexible as far as like not having to be like rigidly ethnically on point, but maybe not like a blonde haired, blue eyed David or something. But
Brad Pitt, even if we could get him, he wouldn't have a place in this show.
Cool. Well, we'll probably be back in 2 weeks then, and we'll kind of pick up with kind of continuing to develop some of the character arcs, and eventually down the road digging into some of these episodes in a little more depth, and kind of sketching out the story of them. So definitely please continue to be leaving your feedback, contributing your own ideas. We would love for this to expand beyond just the three of us. And you can email me at thebibleartist@gmail.com, or I've got websites, Subscribe if you haven't already, please. I always forget to mention that, but it's really helpful if you do, and would love to have you continue to be watching this if you have been enjoying it. So thanks everybody who has been listening, and thanks again, Victor and Chad, for joining me, and looking forward to continuing this project together. And
Have a great week.
Godspeed.